welcome back. And as we mentioned earlier in our intro, we're going to talk about strategic management and the term in its own right, in its own self. What does it mean, and what is the benefit that we could gain as a country and as a community out of applying strategic management? We're very delighted to have with us here live in our studio Dr. Hany EL-Hifnawi, strategic management model leader at the BUE. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning.
Dr. Hany, of course, as we all know right now, Egypt is passing through a very difficult time, and many people have called this a political and economic crisis. Now, how does strategic administration and strategic management work in this situation we're in, and how could we use that to develop and move further and get out of this crisis?
Okay. And first of all, Egypt is more or less like 30 years behind the world in management in general. And the reason strategic management came into existence 1980, which is 33 years ago, and despite that, it's not used yet in Egypt at all. What we are saying about strategic management, it's simply a tool to manage all your resources in order to get everybody aligned and everybody pulling in one direction. So we don't have the 33 or 35 islands, each ministry working on its own. You don't have people who, working in different directions and so on. You will have one strategy map and then a balanced scorecard, which is more or less like measuring the performance or key performance indicators for every minister and every responsible guy in the government, or even including the president himself. And then, in the same time, you can make more or less like quick wins. We call it quick wins, which is really, in few months, you can save about $100 billion annually from your own resources.
Right. You gave us an example here of an article that was written recently. If you can talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. The quick wins, 7 quick wins, it started by the industry itself. More or less, we have about 30,000 companies in Egypt. But the utilization of their assets is very low because they stop, obviously, the machines for maintenance, they stop it for repairs, they stop it for quality reasons, and now we have 2 reasons as well, new ones, electricity shutdowns, and then obviously strikes and so on. So at the end of the day, you are only using 20 to 30% of your assets, while the normal ratio is something like between 80 to 90% worldwide, depending on the industry. So this item alone can increase the productivity 3 times. And the industrial productivity is something like $120 billion. You can increase to $360 billion, i.e. you save $240 billion additional. And when you do that as well, not only you will produce more, but the unit cost itself will be much less, so that you can be competitive, you can start exporting, and so on. That's one item. Second item, and I'm just going to give you 3 examples, quick examples, is how the ports work in Egypt. As soon as the goods arrive, we have what is called as clearance time. By the time the ships start docking until the goods leave the ports, we call that clearance time. In Egypt here, it's about 4 weeks. I was giving some lectures in India about 10 years ago, and the clearance time there was 1 day at that time.
Wow.
Okay. Now Singapore and Hong Kong.
That was 10 years ago.
Oh yes.
1 day in
1
India.
day. And now, recently I was working in UAE, implementing the same strategic management with the government there. And recently, just last week, they got #1 place in the ranking of all the countries as effectiveness of the government in UAE. Now, when we were visiting Singapore and Hong Kong, we found out the clearance time. I told them how many days they have. They said, no, we don't measure it in days. We measure it in hours. So it was 10 hours in Singapore and 8 hours in Hong Kong.
These are assessment surveys?
No, it's an actual figures from the Ports Authority itself about the clearance time. Because if you really keep your goods for 1 month, as we do here, or 4 weeks, it means that you are freezing something like 1/12 of your your imports in per year. So Egypt normally imports something like $48 billion every year. it means that they are freezing something like $4 billion on the docks doing nothing all the time. Okay? And because they are doing this, the 30,000 companies inside the country, each one will have inventory equal to 3 times as much, and so they will have about 12 billion again frozen in all these companies. Okay? So, I mean, that's a problem. That's, you are freezing a lot of money, you are not able to manage your own resources in a better way.
Right.
And there's a lot of solutions as well, like GPS. I think they start using it to solve the problem of solar and petrol and so on.
Right. From where we can see, there is something here on screen that might show what you're talking about.
Okay. But this is, we call it strategy map, which is the first step in strategic management, is to make strategy map. The idea itself came by 2 Harvard doctors, Dr. Norton and Dr. Kaplan, and this was in 1990s. And they said, okay, the indicator is very important, but the financial indicators that everybody is using is really what we call it as lagging indicators. So we need to look at different 4 perspectives, which is the financial, but also what's causing the financial one, which is the customer, in case we are talking about company, or the people, in case we are talking about Egypt. So Egypt, when we have the revolution, people were asking for freedom, were asking for عيش حرية عدالة اجتماعية. Okay, so that's more or less all this value. We're going to put it on that strategy map against the people, and then we'll start measuring it, and then we'll see how we can, because we have in management a principle called if you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So in this strategy map, we put value drivers and then start measuring it in the next slide, which is the balance scorecard. By measuring it, we will be able to see what is the value of every key performance indicators, who is responsible for it. This minister, is he doing okay or not okay? We'll have green light or yellow light or red light. If he's okay, then it will be green. If it is half-half, then it will be yellow. If he's not performing at all, then it will be red.
So how long would it take for Egypt to become among the top 30 economies? I mean, how far are we really behind?
Well, that slide can show you a lot. I mean, this slide is, we call it, if you have sharing information, i.e. people working in different directions, then the net result will be 0. But if you are doing the same effort, but sharing information and sharing objectives, everybody will be pulling in one direction. A lot of countries like Brazil, for example, have done the same thing, and within 10 years, they already came even now before, I think they are ranking now number 6, before even UK, which is, United Kingdom, the empire and all the rest, and they came from, I think the 40th place. So exactly like what Egypt is doing now. The only thing there is much more difficult because they have much higher population. They have about 195 million people. And again, the same situation. They have a problem with security. They have a problem. And all that disappeared in 10 years.
Right, okay. But let me just interfere here and ask you a question that might cross any Egyptian's mind, which is, bless you.
Thank you.
You were talking that you were lecturing in India 10 years ago, which means that they've been dealing with strategic administration, strategic management 10 years ago, and UAE. And you talked about the clearance time and all that stuff. Where was Egypt back then, and where is Egypt? Where does Egypt stand concerning that science of strategic administration or process of, I mean, if you could explain to us, where were we from that?
Right, we are, as I said right from the beginning, we are 30 years behind.
30?
Yeah, 30 years, because this was not
That's about the time of the former regime, the duration of the former regime?
I mean, but since it was invented, the strategic management itself, rather than depending on financial management, i.e., as you find out, as I said, that the financial indicators itself is lagging indicators, i.e. you measure it at the end of the period, so you cannot manage through it, you cannot change it. You change it after the year already elapsed, so it's too late. So you need to look at what caused it, and that's why the whole idea about strategic management. But since 30 years ago when they start implementing it, not only in governments as well as companies, but still they are resisting a lot here in Egypt to change. So we don't have one single company or very few companies. Even the multinationals who are working here while I'm teaching my students and they are doing balanced scorecard.
Do you feel that things have changed now? I mean, with the change of a new regime?
Not really. Still, you know, we are suffering from a syndrome in Egypt. We call it denial syndrome, i.e., when you talk to anybody responsible, he will say, yeah, no, we are okay, we are the best
Everything
company.
is perfect.
Yes,
That
yeah,
sounds
we are
very
perfect.
familiar.
So, you know, if you don't admit that you are sick, you cannot talk about the medicine and, you know, how to receive it and so on. And that's a problem in Egypt. And that's a problem with the current one and with the previous one. It's the same story. So whenever you talk to a minister, whenever you talk to anybody responsible, they will say, okay, yeah, and yeah, we are perfect, you know, we are doing fine. I mean, the previous Minister of Planning, more or less, he was saying in one of the conferences that, you know, he's the best planning minister in the world. So, I mean, if this is the case, we wouldn't be in that problem, I mean, obviously. So, first step is to have to admit.
Admission is very important.
And speaking of admitting problems, the issue is that ministers only focus on the good things that they're doing. They never focus on the problems that we have so that we can move to fix them. I mean, if they present the problems to the public, we have a problem in education, for example, we have a problem in healthcare, and this is what we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, we have steps, but they're not doing any of that.
Exactly. I mean, really, when we start looking at the strategy map that we've seen, you know, it's more or less like 4 different perspectives. The first one, or the highest one, is financial, and then below it, the customer, which produces this financial, and then the internal operations, which is, you know, the goods and service that these customers are paying the money for them. And then the 4th perspective is learning and growth, which is the education of the people, you know, technology, and all the rest. So if you do that, which is the first perspective or the last perspective, you will improve the internal operations, and if you do that, you will get better customers, and if you do that, then the customers will pay you. On the government side, the same thing, same story, and the same different 4 perspectives. So we have the resources, we have huge resources, it's just a matter of managing it properly. So if you manage it, I mean, you know, as I said, the slide that shows people working in different directions, and we have one of the slides here for Dubai. Dubai in 13 years, they were more or less like, you know, complete desert, nothing at all. And then in 13 years only, from 1990 to 2003, they managed to be
an economic hub.
Yeah,
right.
Utilities and everything else, like infrastructure, like New York. So, I mean, it's complete change, you know.
Only
in
13 years.
Yeah, and that's all by strategic management, how to manage it. I mean, this slide will show you, you know, 2 halves. One of them is 1990, which is complete desert, empty, nothing, not even a single road. And then, you know, in 2003, you will have skyscrapers and infrastructure. And
very impressive.
Yeah, very impressive.
Nobody could even imagine that this is a true picture of Dubai, which is the before one. But let me talk about the article that you have here, and you gave us. That's a very simple project that could do wonders. So as an expert, and as you're planning to try to do something with the beginning of a new regime, your suggestions, I mean, you have seen files, Reem talked about the health file, the education file, there are other files also. Tell us if you have ideas or suggestions that with simple projects could do in a very short time some reformation that could be counted on.
Sure. I mean, one of the issues is, you know, the fact that all the factories in Egypt here keep a huge amount of inventory, and you don't realize that they are freezing a lot of money by doing that. We've more or less like done a survey for 800 factories in 14 different sectors, starting from food, from sugar, from oil and gas, and so on. And we found that the average, you know, people, and some of the people, or even famous groups of companies, are having even 6 months inventory. And, you know, we have seen obviously in the world in different industries, like, for example, I'll talk about the steel industry. They are keeping something like 6 days inventory, that's all. Not 3 months and not 6 months. Okay? So, because if you really freeze 6 months inventory, then definitely it will have an impact on your product, I mean, price, and then you will not be competitive as much. So that is very simple. I mean, you know, how to manage it, and obviously you have to manage the lead time, you have to manage the supply chain, you have to agree on different scheduling program with your suppliers, and even you can, you know, think about vertical integration later on, but the size itself of the Egyptian economy and the productivity of it is extremely low. It's about third what other people are doing with the same assets, and that's a main issue. Okay, now with the same philosophy that we've talked about, we can solve any problem we can think of. You know, you can solve, for example, security problems. Okay,
We have a lot of problems to be solved right now in the country.
right. Okay, again, security problems. You have 26 different governors, and you know we have the police obviously working on this 26 governors, and then
Could that be applied on traffic,
yes, again, yeah.
which is in dire need for
Right.
strategic management?
Yes, I mean, and there obviously you find out that you know we need obviously parking slots a lot more than what we have, because 60% of the capacity of the existing streets are already, you know, more or less used as parking. So
True.
you know, so if you do that, I mean, from a strategic perspective, you look at the whole thing from outside, and then you find out all the factors that are creating this problem, and you start solving it in a very scientific way. In project general, I mean, if you talk, for example, about what they were doing in Dubai, yeah, one of the towers that we were responsible for it was 248 meters height, okay, and we've done it in about 11 months. Now it's more or less like 100 meters more than Cairo Tower, and that was done obviously in 11 years. So you will never believe, you know, if you manage your projects in a proper way, how much time you can save. I mean, if you take, for example, Cairo Alexandria Road, it has been you know, they have been working on it now for the last 7 years, and they haven't finished.
And look at
Now-
Al-Mahwar.
Exactly.
They tried. They tried the whole thing from
Right.
from scratch again.
But even that 20 or 220 kilometers, you know, Cairo Alexandria Road, if they are working on it properly, 24 hours like any other important project, they will finish it in about 6 months. But they don't realize that if they do work on a project like that with, you know, real management and proper management and proper follow-up and proper supervision, that they can shorten that lifespan, because time, what we say is we have the resources, well, like the Japanese say, 5M and T. 5M is money, manpower, machine, materials, managerial methods, and T is time. This is the resources that we have to manage.
For us, tea is tea that we drink,
Right. Okay, exactly.
and that needs
So-
tip.
That's the main problem. So we don't realize that if a project is producing 5% and you do it in fifths of the time, your actual growth will be 25% rather than 5%. So if you manage time properly, you will get really much more than what we are doing now.
And all Egyptians have a really bad issue with managing time.
Exactly.
So maybe we should start there.
Exactly. And we're just creating awareness. The first step, we
Awareness.
say, is awareness.
Correct, right.
Always awareness, because we are saying that...
Have the people actually admit that they're
Exactly.
causing a problem and they're facing a problem, and then we can solve it.
That's why we say, you know, there's 4 stages of creating awareness and change management. Normally it will start with unconscious incompetence, i.e. you are not aware that you are incompetent. So you start denial, or you start resisting any change. And then you move to the next stage, which we call it conscious incompetence.
Right.
And then you start being really ready for receiving.
Right.
And then you move on until you get to unconscious competence, which is, you know, it's a habit now. And you can produce like the Fortune 500 companies and so on. Each one of them, for example, in the oil sector, each person working in an oil sector is producing $4.5 million, you know, because this company like ExxonMobil, Shell, Total, and so on, each one they produce something like $450 billion per year.
Wow.
Okay, so it's about twice what Egypt's GDP is. So
Hopefully we can see that happen
and they're
here
not,
in
you
the
know, they're
country.
not, I mean, I've been working with them. I've been managing even them. I was manager there for you know, quite some time.
Right.
I've worked with 25 years at least with this multinational Fortune 500 companies. And it's not magic. It's a matter of using the proper tools and the proper systems. If you do that, then you
Right.
can
So
achieve
Dr. Hany
miracles.
El-Hifnawi, Strategic Management Model Leader at POE, thank you very much for coming over. Thank you for your time. And Reem, I guess it's now it's time for Dina Yunus and a special report she's going. Let's go see what's happening with Dina Yunus.